All right, here we are. Welcome everybody to the live Sinclair Method Q&A. I'm so happy to be here. Today I have with me Samara. Many of you guys know her as a TSM coach, both inside and outside Thrive, and also a success story of the method, and also an advocate for it like me. I think you've just become so passionate about this treatment since it freed you of a multi-decade long alcohol use disorder issue, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know I love work. I've known you over 3 years now, I think but I just love working with you because I feel like you have the same heart and passion I do for TSM and just to spread the word and help people. And even though our history with alcohol was quite different, like our TSM journeys were really similar. So happy to be here with you, Samara, and welcome to everybody who's joining us. This is a really fun time for us to come together with our community and our followers to answer your Sinclair Method questions. If you have questions about the Sinclair Method, whether you are just starting out or you've been on it for a while, or maybe you're just doing some research, we would love to answer the questions that you guys have. So you can drop them in the chat. I see Kat B is already here, dropped us the question. Yay. Awesome to have you here, Kat. We'll start off with your question. But we are streaming on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram right now. So I'll try to go between the platforms and see the questions. If you're on one or the other platform, you may not see the questions coming in from the other platform. So if I'm reading a question you guys aren't seeing, it's because they're probably on another platform. But welcome again, everyone. So let's see. Why don't we just kick things off? Samara, would you like to start things with Kat's question that she has there? Kat, I'll read your question. It's a really good one because a lot of people have this question around naltrexone and pleasure. And Samara, I know you have experience and opinions on this, as do I, and as does our medical advisor, Dr. Volpicelli. So I'll let you kind of start with this question. I'll read it out loud. So it says, is it true that I will not feel the endorphin rush from healthier options until I can string 2 or more alcohol-free days together because the naltrexone might be still in my system? So does that make sense to you?
Yes, yes. I love that question. Such a great question. And, funny enough, I was able to test that theory out in my Sinclair Method journey. And so I really did test it out. That concept stems from the book, The Cure for Alcoholism. And so what I did was I read about it in the book and I was like, you know what? I'm going to try this theory out. But before I explain that, I want to say that we're not doctors and we can't give out medical advice. So this is just from my own experience and my own testing of my own case study, and also everyone is different. So I can't the way I metabolize a medication might be different than how long or how short you metabolize a medication. So it really depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to test out this theory. And so what I discovered for myself, right, was that I am a slow metabolizer of the medication. So it tended to stay in my system for longer periods of time. Typically, it would be in my system until the evening of the following day after an extinction session. So I know that's a little complicated, tactical
So
stuff.
like you took naltrexone yesterday and drank, let's say, and so tonight would be the night that it would be out of your system. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, typically that's how it would work for me. And then the following day, so this would be the second day, I would have a full day of no naltrexone in my system if I decided to go alcohol free and not take the medication. So I did test out the theory by doing an enormous amount of exercise and endorphin related activities on that second day when I had a full day of endorphins, in my brain, right? And what I noticed was that it was the case. I was getting a heightened amount of extra endorphins that I would normally not get from normal activities like exercise and spin class and going for a walk around the neighborhood and playing with my dog, you know, I would get an extra amount of endorphins from those activities. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. You know, like not only am I doing this naltrexone therapy and attacking my drinking, I can also take advantage of this like thing that's happening in my brain where once I give myself a break from the naltrexone for a couple days, I can literally experience a heightened amount of endorphins from just like going and getting a coffee and, you know, like enjoying my coffee or um, going for a walk in nature or going. My big one was exercise. So I would really take that day and do a lot of exercise on that day, and I'd be like flying high on endorphins. It was so much, it was fun.
So how did you feel? Like, how did you know that was happening? If you could describe the experience of feeling like you were getting that uptick of endorphins.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just take an example as spin class. Okay. So
Yeah.
I got really into spin class during that period of time. And I noticed after spin class on those particular days when I was like planning this out and I would, you know, be off of naltrexone for 2 days, I noticed like on the way home from spin class, I was like beyond, I can't even explain it. Like I was on another level of a endorphin high. Like I would blast my music and I'd be dancing in the car all the way home. And I noticed, yeah, and I noticed that I didn't normally do that after spin class. I mean, spin class was spin class, and I would feel good after spin
Yeah.
class, but not like that. That was different. That was like on another level of endorphin high, like living off of life and fully
Wow.
alive feeling. And so I correlated it to that. I was like, this has got to be that uptick in endorphins that I'm experiencing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. And then Kat had a follow-up question. She's saying, does that mean on the first day without naltrexone, so the day after you drank, you just felt normal but not flat?
Uh, yeah. So that's a good, yeah, I wanted to ask, that's a really good question for you, Katie, too. Like, did you ever feel flat? I don't remember feeling flat. I mean, I know some people describe
Yeah.
that feeling, but I don't ever remember feeling totally flat when I was taking naltrexone consistently to attack my drinking. Um, I felt normal, I
Yeah.
guess. I don't know. That just wasn't my experience. Feeling flat was not my experience. But really taking advantage of the uptick in endorphins when my body was flushed out of the medication, right? When the
Yeah.
medication was flushed out, that I notice a difference. So,
Okay. That really helps. And I'll speak to my experience with it as well as just what I know Dr. Volpicelli has said, our medical advisor, and also our friend Dr. Umhau, who's also an addiction specialist, because they're kind of on the medical side where they like understand the research and more of what's going on in the brain. So just from my personal experience, I will say that the day after drinking, sometimes I felt what I would describe as blue. Like I noticed it the morning after when I was getting ready for work. I'd be like, I feel a little blue right now. And I remember chatting with a doctor friend of mine, and he was like, well, it could be the naltrexone, or it could also be that alcohol is a depressant and you're taking naltrexone and it's blocking the feel good effects of alcohol. So maybe
mm,
you're noticing more of the depressing effects. Now, it wasn't like I was depressed and the feeling of blueness. I remember thinking, well, this is well worth it for me to like continue on naltrexone. Like, I don't mind feeling this little blue feeling the morning after. What I noticed is as the day went on, I would feel better. It was typically, I remember clearly when I was getting ready for work when I would feel that. Um, and then also just hearing what Dr. Volpicelli has said about, and for those that don't know, he's a real naltrexone expert, been researching it for decades and using it with patients. He talks about, and Kat, maybe you've heard me talk about this before, how the pleasure centers in the brain are more like a symphony or an orchestra. It's not just like a trombone only. And so naltrexone is working to blunt the endorphin reward, but we have other pleasure hormones that are still operating and not being impacted by naltrexone. So even if, we're not getting the same level of endorphin from other things like exercise or sweet or spicy food or laughing or sports or things like that, we can still feel pleasure from other things. And we actually have, Kat, since you're a member in our program, maybe you've seen it, those couple videos with Dr. V where he's talking about naltrexone and its impact on pleasure. So that's something to keep in mind. So that's kind of, I think, what's happening, neurologically, if you will, where naltrexone is blocking some of the pleasure and endorphins, but not everything. It's not like it's going to blunt all pleasure. Now, with my experience, because I was reading the book, The Cure for Alcoholism, I was like Samara, really intentional with the day after and the second day after I was drinking on Nal to go out and get endorphins, even if it was me watching funny videos on YouTube. Like, that was really easy. I didn't need to leave my couch. And I always found that I would be laughing and that would feel really good. So I would say sometimes I could notice more like what you're describing, Samara, like after your spin class, you're just like on cloud nine. I would notice that sometimes, but I was more doing that practice out of understanding that the science kind of supported it, that there's, the kind of 1 to 2 days after you've taken naltrexone where maybe your brain is super sensitive to the endorphins, and that's a chance to get the endorphins, from other things on the days you're not drinking. So kind of back to your original question, Kat, I don't think that you're going to not experience any pleasure the day or two after drinking. Again, I think it more goes back to Dr. V's kind of analogy that it's more like a symphony and not just like a single instrument, the pleasure center in the brain. And then also, just briefly, our friend Dr. Umhau, he recently sent me a study, which I'm actually working on a short little article for our program members on this, where he showed that people who had long-term sobriety, so these were not people who used naltrexone, they were just people who quit drinking and were sober. I think the study looked at like up to 10 years of sobriety. They found that these people had lower endorphin levels than the average person. And I'm not clear yet if it's a result of the excessive alcohol use for a long time, but what was really interesting takeaway was that even though they were sober for up to 10 years, their endorphin levels were still low, like below normal. And so Dr. Umhau's recommendation to me, I was talking to him about this because I started playing pickleball, and he was like, I recommend pickleball to all my patients because you get a lot of endorphins with all that back and forth, and you're playing with other people and interacting with other people. So he kind of made it sound like you have to be proactive about seeking out these pleasures and endorphins in order to almost rebuild up to the baseline. And again, that study, people were not on naltrexone and they still had low endorphin levels. So, we haven't studied this with people on naltrexone, but that's just an interesting anecdote that I wanted to share.
Wow, that is so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I learned something new and that makes more sense. And I think that was really cool that both of us, we felt like we needed to be intentional in that area. I really felt like I made a shift in my brain because I was intentional at experiencing endorphins on those days, on those specific days. So it was a very technical thing that I did in my Sinclair Method journey to shift over and start really getting more out of natural activities rather than my brain be focused on drinking for getting endorphins.
Yeah. And that's exactly it, Samara. And I want to just say, people who have joined, welcome. If you guys have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. Nice to have you here, Steve, as well. And welcome to others who have joined. But yeah, Samara, I think what you talk about, it really is so important, because I think a lot of us, especially us daily drinkers, we can get stuck in the habit of, we're taking naltrexone, we're being compliant, we're doing TSM, and that's half the battle. But the other half is what we're doing with our alcohol-free days. I really, really believe, and this is something since I've been coaching people in 2018 that I've always encouraged, is to seek out the things that give you pleasure. Seek out things that are rewarding for you on alcohol-free days. Don't just have an alcohol-free day and go to work and do nothing special for yourself, because then it's not going to be anything unique or anything else that you can look forward to, because for so many of us, we've looked forward to alcohol and the reward from alcohol for years or decades. It's almost like we don't even have any other rewards in our life that compare to it. And so it's super important, I think, and kind of like you were saying, to be proactive about and intentional about seeking out those things that give you pleasure and are rewarding, and just little treats. Again, like I would turn on YouTube and just watch funny videos, or, get a massage when I was feeling like spending some money on that, or talking with one of our members, he and I both use a cheeseburger and a milkshake on a Friday instead of a bottle of wine. That was like an improvement from drinking every Friday night, for example. But I think this is so important, and especially again for daily drinkers, we might not even know what feels good to us, but if we can be consistent with pursuing it, I think that's how our brain can kind of gradually let go of alcohol as its preferred reward and start to look toward other things as rewards.
Amen. I love it.
Yeah, and what Steve says here, what Samara is referencing, is called pharmacological enhanced learning. That's also from the book, The Cure for Alcoholism. Have you studied that in depth, Samara, or what? Yeah, what do you know about pharmacological enhanced learning?
Yes, I think I did. I mean, I definitely went over it many times in the book when I was reading it, and I was fascinated by the concept. And I really, like I said earlier, I wanted to test it on myself. I used my own journey as a, case study, and I really was intentional about practicing it. And I did feel like it maximized my results.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
It maximized my results because I was intentionally seeking out other activities, normal, healthy activities, to replace that reward, that alcohol used to be for decades,
Yeah.
so it was intentional. And I recommend it. I recommend studying it and trying it out. You can test it out for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and just for those that don't know, like what David Sinclair showed in his research with pharmacological enhanced learning is that essentially when you're drinking on naltrexone on your drinking days, your brain is, in really simple terms, kind of unlearning alcohol use disorder because it's not getting the same reward. And so, like nearly anything in human behavior, if it's not as rewarding, we're probably going to want to do it less often. And so as we're doing that, coupled with having days without naltrexone, and seeking out other, again, rewarding types of behaviors, our brains begin to learn these other hobbies, pastimes, just things that we enjoy to do in life. And according to David Sinclair, like there's a real opportunity or prime opportunity for our brain to learn different things because we're kind of reinforcing that alcohol is not pleasurable. And then when we don't have naltrexone in our system on alcohol-free days, we're not blocking any pleasure from anything else, endorphin or otherwise. And it's kind of ripe for learning because according to him, the endorphin receptors can be upregulated or supersensitized for a period of time after taking naltrexone. So definitely, if you're curious to learn more about this, look into the book, The Cure for Alcoholism, because it talks about this in pretty simple terms. And I think it can just help you be more mindful and intentional on your TSM journey. Okay. So this question, does naltrexone prevent cravings if you take it on alcohol-free days? Do you want to answer that one?
I really want you to answer that one.
Okay.
I think it's up for debate, but go ahead. You can answer that one.
Yeah. So there is research to show that naltrexone is an anti-craving medication, and in fact, there's a lot of studies that show that it does work in that regard for people who have alcohol craving. And anecdotally, over the years, just on my social media channels, I've gotten so many comments from people who are using it that way, primarily just abstinence and taking it daily. And they do report that it helps them stay sober. I had a guy on Twitter reach out a couple months ago who he was like a couple bottle of wine a night drinker. And he went on it just because he wanted to be abstinent. And he said it almost worked immediately. Like his urge to drink just went away and he's taking it every day. Now, according to Dr. Sinclair's research, I was just chatting with one of our members about this. He kind of says it's not any better than just taking a sugar pill. So in his research, it didn't really show that a daily naltrexone or naltrexone on non-drinking days was very effective. So I think this is still up for debate and probably needs more research. But in my experience, I can't really deny the fact that so many people over the years have told me it's worked for them in that way, that they take it and it helps with cravings. And then also, just in my, TSM experience, the longer I was on the method, there would be days, and maybe Samara, you had this also, where I wanted to drink. I had a craving. And so I took naltrexone. And by the time the naltrexone set in, an hour later, my urge to drink was gone. And sometimes I would drink, sometimes I wouldn't drink. And so for me, in that sense, it did work as an anti-craving medicine. But this was several months into the treatment. I didn't really notice it working that way in the beginning. I still very much wanted to drink after naltrexone set into my system. Yeah. What about you, Samara? What's your experience with it being an anti-craving type of medicine?
Yeah, that was such a good explanation too. Thank you for that. I would say very similar to you, not in the beginning. In the beginning, like if someone has an expectation that this might, right when they first start, like the first 2 days or the first week, and that it'll remove their cravings, that, that to me is a false expectation, because it just, for many of us and that I've coached, my clients and then myself, it didn't remove the cravings right away, but over time, with continued use, yes, I did see my cravings diminishing over time. And eventually they went to zero, the longer I was on it. So yes and no,
I think that's an important point that you bring up too, because like Steve mentioned this study that said it proved that it didn't work in that way. And so I wonder, how long were the people on the medication in that study? I said I've had people tell me that it works for them taking it daily and they're alcohol free. I've also had other people say it didn't do anything. So it's so interesting how nuanced it is for each individual. We also hear from people who did TSM and just felt like they gave it a good try and were compliant, but it just didn't work for them. So, yeah, my thought is like, I was just talking to someone who called this week. He was abstinent, wasn't sure if he wanted to do TSM or daily naltrexone. And it's like, if it were me and I was abstinent, I might try daily naltrexone and see if it helps with cravings. But then if I really wanted to drink, I would do TSM. Like, we're not doctors, but from what I understand, naltrexone is a pretty darn benign medication for most people. So it's, no risk in trying, in my view. Yeah. And also just kind of talking about the impact on pleasure. Like, I think something that was really, I kind of mentioned this earlier, significant for me was the fact that alcohol is a depressant. And I've heard someone describe naltrexone as being like a truth serum, where it really shows you what alcohol really is. And so for me, the longer I was on naltrexone, I felt like naltrexone was allowing me to see it for what it was. Like, I remember drinking red wine, and that was like my kryptonite. I loved red wine, but the longer I was on the method, it just started to taste like vinegar and alcohol, and it was like room temperature. I was like, this is kind of gross. I don't really like it anymore. And it made me remember, like, when I first started drinking red wine, I did not like it. I had to acquire the taste for it. And so that's something that naltrexone can do for some of us. It changes the taste. And again, like it is a depressant. So if we're feeling, kind of back to Kat's original question, if we're feeling blue or down, or like we're not getting pleasure, or we're not feeling joy in life, like considering alcohol's role in that, like maybe naltrexone is contributing, but maybe alcohol is contributing as well. And kind of back to Dr. Umhau's recommendation and what we've talked about, really being consistent with pursuing things that are giving you pleasure and reward, healthful things, hopefully, that are not addictive.
Yeah, I love what Steve said here, that taking the medication daily, regardless of whether you drink or not, cannot facilitate pharmacological extinction. I think that is the reason that because I had a decision to make when I was going to do the Sinclair method, like whether I would do it daily, take it daily, like the mainstream way of, what's on the label, right, of taking the medication, or really follow the Sinclair method. And I personally chose the Sinclair method because I love the idea of targeting my drinking behavior and really attacking it, acutely.
Yeah.
And for a short period of time, like attacking it, unlearning the behavior in the brain, and then reaching pharmacological extinction. That really sounded amazing to me. I wanted that. I desired that. And so, that influenced my decision.
Yeah. Yeah, same here. Like I didn't because I don't know if there's research into this or not. But there is definitely some anecdotal reports of it of people experiencing anhedonia or just kind of like feelings of blahs if they're taking naltrexone daily over a long period of time. We have people in our program who are daily drinkers and they've been taking it for a long period of time, and I haven't heard them say anything, but I have heard people say this over the years. Um, so for me too, like you said, Samara, it's like I didn't want to have to take a medication more than I needed to. And on an
Right.
alcohol-free day, it didn't make sense for me to take it. And I really like clung to Sinclair's research that, and what Roy Escapa says in the book, The Cure for Alcoholism, that, on those alcohol-free days, those 1 to 2 days where you don't have naltrexone in your system, that's your invitation and opportunity to seek out other activities that are rewarding and don't involve alcohol. And understanding that that's not just like to kill free time, essentially, it's really doing something for the learning centers in your brain and the reward centers in your brain. Like if you can do that consistently, what I've seen happen with clients is we always have the option to drink. Like that's always on the table. But what happens the longer they're on the method and the more they're consistent with, you know, learning new hobbies and things they really enjoy, drinking is an option, but it's like, yeah, it's not really that pleasurable. And I have to take naltrexone and wait an hour. Like, I'd rather just go to the gym and, cook dinner and watch a funny movie or something like that. Like, they start to prefer these other activities
Yes.
because their craving is less. And when they kind of like think it all the way through, it's like, yeah, it's not that fun anyway, or, I don't really feel like it anyway. And I think, like a lot of people say, naltrexone gives us that space to be able to think about whether we want to drink or not. It's no longer this like urgency of, oh my gosh, I have this craving and I have to like feed the craving right now. Over time, it does that, I would say. Yeah. Okay, so Donna is asking, day after naltrexone, your endorphins are reduced. So if you pursue healthier options, maybe there's no advantage, or as endorphins are reduced. So basically asking, day after taking naltrexone, your endorphins are reduced. No, that's not exactly what's happening. And again, we're not neuroscientists or doctors, so we can't say exactly what's happening. Donna, if you're a member in our program, this would be a great question for the Q&A with Dr. Volpicelli tomorrow. But basically, what Dr. Sinclair and Roy Escapa talked about in the book, The Cure for Alcoholism, is the day after you take naltrexone, your body is basically like flushing the rest of the medication out of your system. Like it's in your system for approximately 24 hours. And so it's not that you have less endorphins that day, you just have residual medicine in your system that is being flushed out. So endorphin producing activities may not hit fully because you're still having some of the naltrexone in your system. But then the day following that, that's what Dr. Sinclair talked about as essentially a day where your endorphin receptors may be upregulated and essentially prime for learning new activities because they're super sensitized. Like they're sensitive for a period of time. Again, it's not the day after you drink, but the following day, where they're super sensitive because they've just been blocked by naltrexone. And now the naltrexone is completely out of your system. So they're extra sensitive for a period of time. And that's where you can be really ripe for learning other healthier activities. But I will say, like, I was trying to like over plan this when I was on TSM, where I was like, oh, it's the day after, so I shouldn't go for a run today, even though I want to go for a run, or I shouldn't eat spicy food, even though I want to. Like, if I were you, I would just pursue the activities regardless if you're on naltrexone or not, but be more intentional on those alcohol-free days, the 1 to 2 days after you've taken naltrexone, if it's an alcohol-free time. Really try to be intentional with pursuing the pleasurable activities on those days, but don't try to be too don't overthink it, because like ultimately if you're doing an alcohol-free activity, like that's a win. You're changing your habits gradually. Anything you want to add to that, Samara?
Yeah, that was so good. Yeah, and I was just gonna add, I tried not to overthink that. I knew about it, but I didn't want to overthink it. I didn't want to stress about it because I wanted to kind of keep like the main thing, the main thing. And the main thing was getting extinction sessions under my belt, and taking the naltrexone and attacking my extinction session, my drinking session, right? And targeting it. And for however months I needed to do that, however many months, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of wanted to keep the main thing, the main thing. I knew that eventually I was looking out to the future. I wasn't always going to need to take this medication. I was going to need to maybe take a maintenance dose later on, like I was planning for the future, and I would definitely use that future, vision. I would use that often. I knew that I wasn't going to have to be on this medication forever. I knew that I was going to hit extinction. I believed it in my heart,
Yeah.
and so and then eventually, pretty soon afterwards, I mean, it was only about 5 months for me. And I know that's kind of on the sooner side.
Yeah.
I was able to drink 1 to 2 glasses of wine per month,
Wow.
and so I wasn't taking the medication. I was only taking it twice a month
Yeah.
after extinction. So yeah, I got there pretty quickly. And so any amount of discomfort that I did have, from, you know, like strategically blocking my endorphins for a purpose,
Yeah.
right? Um, I got it back quickly.
Yeah.
I went back to normal pretty quickly,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. And just to say too, like you kind of reached extinction. And by the way, oftentimes people equate extinction to abstinence, but with Dr. Sinclair's research, pharmacological extinction essentially in simple terms means regained control over alcohol. So when people reach extinction on TSM, it's not that they're necessarily abstinent. They're just in a place where they consistently have control over alcohol, whether they're drinking or not. And typically they don't really have cravings for alcohol. They may have thoughts about drinking, like, oh, it's 5 o'clock and I used to always drink at this time. A thought is different than a craving. And we can talk more about that if you guys want. But yeah, I just want to say too, like with your, I know with you, because I have your success story on my YouTube, which you guys should go watch if you haven't seen it. But you talked about how your second time of doing TSM, because the first time it didn't really work for you, you didn't fully commit, but you
Yeah.
were purposeful with it. Like you took it so seriously and it was like the number one focus in your life. And so I can only assume that like you responded as quickly as you did, being someone who had 20 plus years of drinking and things like that behind you. You took it really seriously. And not to say just because someone's taking it seriously, they'll respond quickly. That's not like a hard and fast rule, but that's something I've always noticed as part of your story. Like this was like, I'm committed and I'm not giving up and this is going to work for me. And I just think that's a really inspiring and cool part of your story.
Oh, thank you, Katie. Yeah, I mean, the first time I did learn from all my mistakes the first time around. So the second time around, I had it more down. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I was very purposeful the second time around. The first time I wasn't. And that's okay, right? That's
Yeah.
okay because it was just a stage of progress that I was in, and I was kind of dabbling with naltrexone, and I had one foot in, one foot out, and that's okay because now, the second time around when I came back to it, I was all in. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I am doing this, you know. So
Which that commitment really does make a difference. Like I've known plenty of people as a coach over the years who, they're taking naltrexone, but maybe they're not super ready to make the change yet. So they're not taking it all the time, or they're not waiting the full hour, or maybe they're being totally compliant, but they're not really changing any other habit or behavior to help the medication work better. Last night in our meeting in the program, the topic of meeting the medicine halfway came up a lot, and people realizing how important that is to, really changing our drinking habits. But yeah, I think sometimes people ask me, oh, this treatment won't work for this type of drinker or a really heavy drinker. And I personally have seen it work for the spectrum of alcohol use disorder, whether mild, moderate, or severe. Now, it doesn't work for everyone all the time, but I think one of the things that really helps it work is someone's commitment to it, because it needs time to work and we have to follow the protocol correctly. But I think that it can work for most people, especially if they're, committed to their change. Like with anything, if you want to lose weight, you really got to want it for yourself. Like you're not going to be successful if you're trying to do it for someone else or you don't really wholeheartedly want the change. Okay, so this person says, I seem to vomit frequently if I binge drink after taking naltrexone. I don't vomit if I don't take it. That's interesting. I'm sorry to hear that, first of all. I would be curious to hear if because nausea and throwing up can be a side effect for some people. So I'm curious to hear like how often you're taking naltrexone. If it is the case that like you're not taking it frequently enough for your body to adjust to the side effects of it. I've also heard some doctors say that, if someone takes naltrexone while hungover or while they still have alcohol in their system, it can enhance more side effects like that, which is why some studies suggest that people have like a 7-day alcohol-free period before starting naltrexone. It can help minimize side effects, so the studies say. So I'm curious if there's other factors in that, but either way, that sucks. I'm sorry to hear that. Any questions or comments you have on that one, Samara?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I was thinking, maybe that is a sign, right? That the medicine is really working, right? That it really is responding quickly.
Yeah.
Your drinking behavior is responding quickly to the medication, right? And in that case, it would be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine that binging is one of the things that you want to stop doing, right? So that could be it too. So
yeah, like if somehow the naltrexone is making you more sensitive to alcohol, like some people have worse hangovers. We call them nalovers on naltrexone and TSM. Doesn't happen for everyone, but some people. So that's interesting. Yeah, hopefully you can get that resolved. This person says, who prescribes naltrexone? So technically any doctor can prescribe it. Unfortunately, a lot of general doctors don't know about it. So I get emails almost every day from people telling me they asked their doctor and their doctor refused a prescription. That happened to me when I first started on it as well. I went to 5 doctors in my area and nobody would prescribe it. It was very discouraging. But technically any doctor can. So like this person, if you wanted to go to your doctor, you can ask them, maybe bring a study about naltrexone for alcohol, but just be prepared that they may not prescribe it, or they may prescribe it differently than TSM or just differently in general. I've seen some people whose doctors will only prescribe it for 3 months and then they won't give them any more after that, which just makes no sense. So technically any doctor can. There are doctors here in the US that prescribe through telemedicine, like in Thrive's program. If you join us, we can refer you to one of our telemedicine physicians who specialize in naltrexone for alcohol use disorder and can consult on a prescription with you there. Any benefits of doing low dose naltrexone? I'm curious for this person if you mean in general for low dose naltrexone or for alcohol. Again, I actually asked this question of Dr. Volpicelli because on my social media, sometimes I get comments from people saying, I went on LDN for whatever other issue, weight loss, or it's got lots of different purposes, long COVID, what's another one? Chronic pain, inflammation. Like it works for all types of autoimmune conditions.
Autoimmune, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but I've seen people comment that they went on that and they noticed that their desire for alcohol coincidentally went down as well when they went on LDN. So I asked Dr. Volpicelli about this, and because it is such a low dose, like LDN is typically 4.5 milligrams around there, whereas naltrexone for the Sinclair method is 50 milligrams. So it's quite a bit larger dose. But Dr. V said that potentially if someone's on LDN, it could reduce their craving for the first drink, but it wouldn't necessarily help them after that. Like if they started drinking after taking LDN, it probably is not a sufficient dose to block the endorphin reward from the alcohol. So it might prevent the initial craving or reduce it, but it's probably not enough to block the endorphins like the 50 milligram dose is.
Or reach pharmacological extinction with that level,
Yeah.
that dosage. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of the studies into naltrexone for alcohol are 50 milligram, and some people need more. Some people do okay with less. I took 50. Did you take 50, Samara?
I did. I had to work up to it. And then once I got there, I tried to stay there as long as possible.
Yeah. Because you were really sensitive to the medication, right?
Yes. I had to start at like a quarter of it because I was just so sensitive to it. And I had a lot of side effects. And it was very frustrating for a long time. I had to like I didn't know how to mitigate them back then. And, I had to learn everything through trial and error.
And it's not fun. Like, not everyone has side effects. Like mine were pretty mild, but for those of you that are more sensitive to it and take time to adjust, like it's not fun. They're not pleasant. And sometimes it can even deter people from continuing on it because they don't recognize that it'll get better in most cases. And so they're like, oh, this medication made me sick. I'm never taking it again. But what research shows is that for most people, they happen in the beginning, the side effects, and then they seem to get better over time. But there's a percentage of people that don't tolerate it at all. I've heard that.
Yeah, well, what happened with me was that, the first time around in 2019, that was one of the main reasons I quit was because of the side effects, because I was getting more and more alcohol-free days. But then when I would take the medicine again, the whole 50 milligrams, I would be really sick after like maybe 5, 6 days that I hadn't taken the medicine because I was alcohol-free. And I would be all sick all over again. And it was so frustrating. I was like, how am I going to ever do this? Like, if I'm getting sick like this every single time, I start drinking again. So a whole year went by and then I figured it out the next, the time after.
Yeah. You figured out how to take different supplements and work with naltrexone dosing so that you had fewer side effects.
Yeah, what I'll give you guys the secret of what happened with me. The second time around, I did discover LDN. And that's how I was able to manage the side effects, because once I was taking a small little tiny dose of, that 4.5 milligrams nightly, then when I would take the full dose, it didn't give me the side effects. It was amazing. It was like such a miracle that
So
happened.
you were taking LDN at night, and then when you would take the full dose of naltrexone, you were taking LDN every night, and then when you take full dose of naltrexone, you didn't have those same side effects.
Exactly. It was like greatly reduced. And then I also still did the whole protocol of the meal and the large glass of water and the 2 tablets of non-drowsy Dramamine in my case. So I did all of these things. I mean, it was a whole protocol of how I would approach taking the medication. And I really did eliminate the side effects, even giving myself weeks of alcohol-free time in between, because at that point I was having a lot more alcohol-free time. And so I was able to do it and, to do the Sinclair method to completion because of LDN. So thanks to Claudia for suggesting it, because I had no idea. I didn't even know it existed. And it really was a lifesaver for me. Yeah.
Yeah. Just that one little trick. It's kind of amazing that worked so well. Outside of the side effects, I was curious to ask you, what was the hardest part of your TSM journey?
For me?
Yeah, for you.
Oh my
You, right
goodness.
there.
Me? Me? Yeah.
No, the
I
person behind you.
like, who? No, I think it okay, yeah, so this is would be on the behavioral side, right? So uh replacing the how do I say this? Replacing alcohol as the number one coping tool in my life was
Mhm.
hands down the hardest part. Like, I mean, first of all, I didn't even attack the issue until like the very end because I was so resistant resistant to it. And we want to hold on to that coping tool, and it's
Yeah.
like it took a while for me to even get on board and to do that inner work that I needed to face in order to, to get real with myself about changing the way I coped with the ups and downs of life, and so that was for sure the hardest part.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, I think that was one of the hardest for me as well. I think what's coming to mind is probably learning a different way to turn off my brain at 5 o'clock, because I was the typical like race home from work, grab a bottle of wine at the store and like, or a couple bottles of wine or whatever, and just spend my evening drinking. And it was just a way to like turn off my brain after the workday. And I feel like I had gotten so conditioned to that instant relief from alcohol, like within just even that first sip of wine, you're just like, you can feel the warmth and the buzzy effects and all of that. So I was so used to almost that like immediate and instant gratification of the alcohol that honestly, like nothing else, unless it's another addictive drug, does that. Like nothing else gives us that immediate hit of pleasure. And I think that kind of what makes something addictive is when it like spikes your pleasure really instantly.
Yeah.
Um, so that I think was hard for me because I was not only wanting to break that habit of relying on the nightly wine or nightly drinking, but also had to teach myself that like it wasn't all about that instant hit and that instant gratification, and really learning to value delayed gratification and value, to your point, like coping tools that, a hot bath or a long walk or eating a yummy meal, like that's pleasurable, but it didn't give me that instant hit like alcohol did. So not only was it changing the habit, but it was also having to teach myself that you can't really look for things that are giving you that instant hit anymore, because they're always just going to be addictive. Like I had a marijuana use disorder kind of coupled with the alcohol, not as bad as the alcohol, but it was something that formed as well. So I just learned that, yeah. And I think that's tricky for a lot of people. I don't know, you as a coach, if you've seen that as well, where it's like, we're so used to the instant effects of alcohol. It's like, even with naltrexone, it's kind of hard to let that go.
Yeah, for sure. When you were talking about that, I related to that so much. That was one of, when I was doing the inner work that we often talk about, where we meet the pill halfway, right? I realized that I had this inner belief that I was believing about wine and how it was the only way that I could unwind at the end of the day, after work was over, and I put a stamp on the day by having my glass of wine, but it was more like a bottle and a half. So it was like
Mhm.
I was believing that this was the only way that I could unwind. Like, how crazy is that? I started to challenge that belief. I was like, that's not true. Like, there's so many people out there that don't need to unwind in that way with a bottle and a half to 2 bottles of wine per night. I don't have to be that kind of a person. Why do I think
Yeah.
that I'm that kind of a person? I started to like have this inner dialogue with myself about it. And I would even journal about my thoughts and feelings about it because I wanted to acknowledge my feelings like they were valid. But I also wanted to challenge myself to get out of my comfort zone and really think from a different perspective. And finally I came to the conclusion that I don't have to believe that, right? I can believe that there's another way to unwind. And once I did that, there was a major shift that happened, because then my brain started looking for evidence on how to unwind in different ways, right? It was
Yes.
all down to a belief that I had. And now I was willing to change that belief. And it opened up a world of opportunities of different ideas and different options and different things I could experiment with. And, bubble baths and walking in nature and doing all the things that we do now, right? To cope. Now I have all of those things, right? I don't
Yeah.
cope with alcohol anymore, right? So it had to start somewhere. It had to go back to a belief that I was believing. Once I was able to release that belief and choose to believe something different, my world opened up for me. So,
Yeah. And that's something I think you and I relate a lot to, as a significant part of our journey and our success on TSM, and something I certainly did not anticipate, but came to kind of discover maybe partway through my TSM journey, when I was still operating, like, for example, under the belief that alcohol was the only effective coping tool. And like, I couldn't experience anger or sadness without drinking. Like, what? That just was like, seemed impossible to me.
mm,
Um, and realizing that how like a lot of my drinking was like unconscious behavior, even that belief of like, okay, this uncomfortable emotion equals me taking naltrexone and drinking. Like, it was just automatic.
mm,
And having to become aware, like, hey, this pattern is playing out, that like my conscious self wants to change, but it keeps playing out. Like, why is that? And I think, like you articulated so well, it's that underlying belief that was kind of pretty much unconscious to me, that, and like there was multiple beliefs about alcohol, like, that
uh-huh.
were intertwined with my identity. Like, I drink in social settings, and I drink on Friday nights, and I drink at this restaurant with my husband, like, and I started to realize, like, oh, like, I don't have to do any of that. I don't have to drink at that restaurant. I don't have to drink on Friday night. I can if I want to, but I don't want this like unconscious pattern playing out when, like, my conscious self is saying I want something different. And so I find for a lot of people on TSM, if you see yourself stuck in this habitual pattern that you don't want, like, man, I was going to have 2 drinks last night and I had the whole bottle of wine. Like, what's going on? I took naltrexone. You know, what's happening? And it could be the habits playing out, but underneath the habits is that belief system that's operating, that, oh, I always drink a full bottle of wine, or I want to feel a certain way when I drink alcohol. I need to feel a certain level of buzz to, like, you know, uh, uh, get the hit from alcohol, if you will. Um, but there's like, that's why we always in our program talk about meeting the medicine halfway and the other 50%, because naltrexone's so powerful, but it's just a tool that, like, I feel like opens up Pandora's box for you to
Yeah.
realize, like, oh, it's actually a pretty complicated relationship with alcohol, and there's a lot of things that I need to change. Like we always advocate in our program, little by little, gradually, but becoming aware of these behaviors that are playing out, that will take effort, and you, again, meeting the medicine halfway to change. Especially, I don't know, like, you were more of like a binge drinker, so you had alcohol-free days kind of baked into your life naturally with your style of drinking. I was a daily drinker. Often I see people who are daily drinkers take longer to respond to naltrexone than binge drinkers. There's different challenges for both types, but what
Yeah.
would you say to that? What do you observe as a coach and with people in our program?
Yeah, I observed that very thing. And we each style of drinker has different challenges, and that's okay. We know what those challenges are, and so we can address them. Um, but yeah, being a binge drinker, I had alcohol-free days already baked in, so I was able to really take advantage of that first topic that we were talking about. Um, the endorphin reuptick. I was able to really take advantage of that early on, I think. But yeah, a lot of what we're talking about right now, with the habits and the changing of the coping tools and all of the inner work, that tends to happen, like, around the second phase of the Sinclair
Yeah.
method, or like maybe after the third month ish, because the first few months, it really is almost impossible to even think that way, or have the mental space to even think about these things. And I didn't work on these things the first 3 months. And I don't know if you did, but I just wasn't there yet mentally. Yeah, thinking about really bigger topics such as like the ways that I cope and my belief systems and what I was believing about myself and then how alcohol intertwines itself into my identity. I didn't really think about all that stuff yet. And then once naltrexone was in my system for a good 3 months, and I had been compliant, fully compliant at that point, then things started to open up, like you said, the Pandora's box. And I started to really be able to like really take a step back from my drinking behavior and observe it from this like real non-judgmental place, like really observing, objectionally observing it, and like seeing where does all of this stem from? What am I believing about alcohol? Why do I think that I always have to drink at this restaurant, the same experience? Why do I have, so those
Yeah.
questions started coming up later on.
Yeah. Really well said, Samara. And I like that you brought up that it's more like a phase 2, because the first phase is really just taking naltrexone and you honestly don't really know what to expect. And you and I can try to articulate what that first phase is, but someone doesn't really understand it until they personally experience it themselves. Like I keep referencing our group call last night because it was fresh on my mind, a lot of interesting conversations. But one of our members, I would say he's like in phase 2 of the method, and he is in this weird part of his journey where he's like, I don't really enjoy drinking anymore, but on one hand, I'm still turning to it because it is giving me these benefits. And I'm like really thinking about the role I want it to play in my life. And it's kind of like a mourning process because he's letting go of his old relationship to alcohol and trying to figure out what the new relationship with alcohol looks like. And I think this is something that is unexpected, and maybe we don't really talk about that much, especially for people starting TSM, because again, it's only something somebody can understand when they're personally going through it on their own TSM journey. But that is more like phase 2, phase 3 of the method, where okay, you see naltrexone working, you probably are drinking a little bit less, maybe your cravings are a little bit less, and then that's the time to, like you said, become kind of curious about the role alcohol is playing in your life and all of these behaviors that are playing out. And appreciate that you said that, non-judgmental, because I think we can be so hard on ourselves. Like, oh, why did I screw up last night and drink too much? Like that's almost our automatic response with AUD brain. We're just like mean to ourselves.
Yeah.
At least I was. Sounds like you were too. But just to observe and not judge, like just like you're watching a movie in a way of like, okay, I noticed last night I drank twice as much than I planned. Like what could have led up to that? What was I feeling? What was I doing? What was I thinking? Where was I at? And kind of, I think you referenced in a post recently in the program, like Sherlock Holmes, like just being a little investigator in your own relationship with alcohol. And doing that can just produce so much insight. And that helps you as you progress on the method. So that like self-reflection, examining your relationship with alcohol with a curious mindset, not being too hard on yourself, approaching this, understanding it takes time, having this mindset that, hey, this is probably going to take a year, maybe less, maybe a little more, but having that realistic expectation can just take some of the pressure off and help you to heal ultimately. Like I know you and I have called this like a healing journey. We're healing on all levels, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, as we kind of redefine alcohol's role in our life.
Absolutely. And it is true. You do end up starting to discover who you really are, because I think alcohol masks that, so many aspects of who you are. And then, once you get to phase 3, I think you're like, well, what do I like? And who really am I? And what do I like to do? And what are the things that bring me so much joy and make me feel alive? And you start discovering all these things. And it's really a beautiful awakening of sorts.
It is. And, maybe people here have tried to quit drinking or tried to moderate or tried to take breaks before TSM. And I am just here to say, I know you are too, Samara, and so many other success stories, that it's a night and day difference to get free from alcohol through TSM versus just trying to like do it when your brain is essentially still hijacked by the addiction, because it's so much easier to get to know yourself and who you really are at the core, your likes and dislikes. It's so much easier to do that stuff when your brain isn't just constantly like, don't drink, don't drink, don't drink, or
Oh
I
my
want to
God.
drink, I want to drink, I want to drink. It's like, that was like, I was sober 6 months one time before TSM, and every day I was like, okay, just don't drink today. Like, it was just like this like focus. It was hard to
Yeah.
like could absorb myself into anything else because I was just fighting the urge. And that was 6 months alcohol free. You would think after 6 months it would be like different, but it wasn't. Now, you know, the alcohol deprivation effect, I definitely feel like that was happening for me. But yeah,
Absolutely.
it's amazing how much alcohol can numb and mask all of these like aspects of yourself. And through TSM, you gradually kind of come back to yourself and get to know who you are. And it's such a beautiful process.
Yes.
Okay, I think we're at, oh wow, the hour is already here. So I just
Oh,
want to read this comment from Veteran 007. People who drink all day may need 250 milligram doses morning and evening to provide adequate protection. I do see that definitely with some people. Of course, ask your doctor about that dosing. Hopefully if you guys are watching this, you're working with a knowledgeable TSM provider. And then Kat's comment, this is so true. I feel like I'm being more mindful and more present than I ever was before TSM, and I'm still new at this. That's awesome to hear,
oh
Kat.
wow. That's amazing, Kat. That is
Something
so cool to hear.
yes. And that's something to celebrate. Like TSM, yes, we're focused on drink reduction, but changes like that, like even if you're still drinking more than you want, it's like noticing that you're being more present and more mindful. I mean, that's life-changing right then and there. And understanding this method works better and better the longer you do it and are engaged in the protocol. So you're seeing these small wins, as we call them in our program, but that's a pretty significant win.
Oh,
Samara taught
yes.
me celebrate this moment. Samara is
Yes.
such an awesome coach and TSM advocate.
Oh, thank you, Katie.
Yes. Okay. Well, we're at the top of the hour, you guys. This has been such a fun time connecting with you all. Thank you for the amazing questions and conversations. I don't think I missed anything. Is there anything you see, Samara, that I missed?
No, it was such a good, thorough conversation, and we got to talk about so many different aspects of the TSM process, all the way from phase 1 to phase 3. So, yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Samara and I will be back again. Well, I'm not sure exactly
Oh,
because I'll be gone next month, but we'll be back again as soon as we can. Um, and I'll be posting the replay to our program members of this. If you are watching and you want to go back from the beginning, that will be in there. Thank you guys so much for joining. And as always, if you want support on the Sinclair Method, whether you are just getting started or you've been on it for a while and want personalized TSM support from expert coaches and psychologists and doctors, definitely check us out at thrivealcoholrecovery.com. All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.